If you're new in town or just new to this whole podcast thing, you're tuning in to Law by Night, the podcast that discusses all things vampiric with no fear of breaching the Masquerade. In this episode, we shall review the Werewolf the Apocalypse 5th edition corebook as I attempt to dissect my thoughts and opinions on its presentation, lore and mechanics to help you better decide whether this is the game for you. If you have listened to any of my book reviews, you will know that I tend to give a bit of background history into my obtaining of the book in question and why I thought it would be a pretty neat thing to own. I'm not doing that this time. I went into this book expecting pain and tremendous amounts of disappointment, but nothing could prepare me for what I would actually find. Did I go into this with an open mind? Despite the controversies that led up to this book's release, I gave the game a go and ran a few sessions, so yes, is it really as bad as I make it sound? No. It's significantly worse, as we shall promptly explore in what I feel is going to be the most disorganised review of mine to date. But before we do that, here are the rules for the Law by Night book reviews. I will explore snippets of the lore, mechanics and rules found within the tome. I will look as to how they are presented and easily they're conveyed to new and old players alike. As this is a review written and presented by me, all thoughts and opinions are my own, so if you disagree with something I have said, that is totally fine. It does not mean that you are right and I'm wrong and vice versa. A good place to start with anything is at the beginning, which has a start of the physical book itself, which currently sits nicely upon my lap. It is a letter-sized hardback book with a front and back cover illustrated by known artist and thief Christoph Byrwisky, whose name I've probably butchered. Starting with the front, the Garu, in its Krynos form, a bloody red raid silhouette, reveals the corruption of Gaia, the Earth Mother, slowly killed by pollution, represented here in the form of an oil refinery. It's an emotive piece for sure, the Garu tearing back the wooded veil, revealing the true nature of the world they were supposed to watch over, and to the death of their mother they have caused. There are, unfortunately, two things that ruin this for me. The first is that the oil refinery is traced. The original photo can be found on Shutterstock, a link to which I'll put in the description below. This single, presumably illegally sample piece is debatably not the end of the world, but this tracing and stealing art will be addressed in fuller detail in just a moment. The second thing is that a friend recently described this as a werewolf gootsy, so that taint will live with me to the day I die. You're welcome. The back cover shows two werewolves, John Newman, Ahmed and Lupus, looking angry and distant in slightly different directions, highlighting to the newer reader that maybe werewolves in the World of Darkness 5th edition are not mindless beasts out for blood, just most of its fan base. Jabs aside, the wolf is beautifully detailed, but the human looks a bit gormless, which I don't think was the intention, but hey-ho. This illustration is also found at the beginning of the character creation chapter, which I think is a peculiar choice to repeat the artwork there, but I'll discuss that in a moment too. The blurb itself is an interesting thing to read to those familiar with older editions of Werewolf, harbouring the near warlike and inspirational speech a leader might give to an army, obviously taking a Garu focus here. To newer readers, this does a good job at presenting the main themes of 5th edition Werewolf, which I will refer to as W5 from this point onwards. The coming of the end times, the titular apocalypse with the newest and latest generation of Garu, possibly the last, making a stand to face the inevitable end. Now this should invoke excitement for older fans of Werewolf the Apocalypse, but as we shall soon see, this excitement is not only wasted, but slashed into 1,000 ribbons. On that note, the core book comes with a pissed yellow ribbon bookmark, though it does borderline gold. That is not the only choice for the colour scheme of the core book either. W5 takes a large departure to its older 5th edition siblings, Vampire the Masquerade and Hunter the Reckoning, which presents their respective information with deep blood red and construction orange respectively against white paper. W5's page backgrounds have a sort of parchment look to them, giving it an earthy feel. Headings are a muddy brown, with subheadings are presented in a dark swampy Shrek green, adding to the earth tones W5 is attempting to emulate, subtly enforcing to the reader that the Garu are creatures of the wild. pun intended. The problem with this is that both the green and brown were not well received by fans when World of Darkness and Renegade Game Studios unveiled W5's gimmick dice that are not only garish to look at, but are both the perfect shades for those who are colorblind to not tell the difference between the two dice, handicapping a small portion of the fan base. Such complaints to change them to anything more aesthetic and less ableist were ignored, as one would expect. As such, similar comments are made to the colour choices World of Darkness have made with this core book. Also, I find it interesting that the quality of the paper is not the glossy magazine feel that many 5th edition books have. It's rougher and a bit heavy, with a slightly better quality and texture to the premium print Drive-Thru RPG's print-on-demand books have. Regarding the rest of the presentation, I shan't deny that compared to V5, the shorthand for Vampire the Masquerade 5th edition, W5 is easy to read and locate information. There is a workable index to locate what you need easily, and any new rule or mechanic is consistently presented at the end of its write-up in a nice little summary section, and it's not scattered across 10 pages like V5 would do. W5 differs from V5 and H5, Hunter 5th edition, in its artwork too. Both Hunter and Vampire have a mixture of drawn and photographic pieces across their core and source books. W5 only has drawn and painted artwork here, which is understandable given it is a bit more difficult to create photorealistic werewolves convincingly. That, and W5 has a greater focus on spirit and spirit world, so there is a greater inspirational pool for artists to draw upon. At the same time, the 5th edition line of the World of Darkness games do have a much stronger focus on the more humane elements of their respective lines, for better and for worse, so the artwork in W5 tends to be a bit more grounded and realistic, lacking the comic-like illustrations WTA is known and loved for, so don't expect Ron Spencer's iconic Garu and Nexus crawler designs, for they are far too far-fetched and have too many abs for the main developers and designers for W5 to handle. In case you are curious as to who they were, we have World of Darkness legend Justin Achille, who has stated on more than one occasion he does not like Werewolf the Apocalypse, and Kareem Mormer, someone who will be spoken about in greater detail at various points in this review. As for the artwork itself, I do honestly love most of the pieces found in this book, with the vast majority capturing the brutal nature of the rage-induced Garu in many different shapes and forms, the chaotic Umbra, and the nomadic culture that W5 tribes seem to have adopted, which is essentially the litany, with each piece in clearly different styles, using newer artists not found in previous 5th edition books, almost presenting each piece as its own snapshot in a story. For a Garu that's passed on to the next, a common theme found in older editions of Werewolf the Apocalypse. There are some pieces I do want to talk about in a bit more detail. The core book opened strongly with 3 colourful pieces by Michelle Jack, otherwise known as her alias Wolf Skull Jack, her style being a sketch yet detailed graphic novel style which gives scenes a lot of energy and character, and her colour choices just pops, adding to the spiritual nature of the Garu. I do think, however, that her style clashes against the rest of the art found in this book because of the adversity of having more realistic wolves and the Garu with strong earth tones in this book. It is also rather odd that her only inclusions are those 3 pages, and I don't think it's a particularly great design. One of those pieces could have easily replaced the duplicate I talked about from the back cover, making that chapter more inviting as a result, as that will be a chapter most visited by players and storytellers alike. I'm also not a fan of the Garu designs by many of the artists, or any of them to be honest, as they're all skinny, furry wolfings that lack the power and ferocity in their design that would cause delirium in mortals. A notable offender of this are the Garu in Krynos form on page 205. They are just wolves on hind legs, not really scary at all to be honest. Most of the W5 pieces that have the most vibrant and modern dynamism is Felipe Headley Lima Frazaro da Costa, whose name I have probably butchered, a Brazilian artist who I've had the personal pleasure of speaking to about some of his input with W5. It's clear to me that long before our conversations that he gets what 5th edition is trying to do with Werewolf, and his art reflects this, whilst retaining the spiritual horror unique to Werewolf, such as the pieces on pages 135, 331, the final page of the book, and any of the pieces depicting the Umbra, which all appear to be done by him. Philippe also designed new glyphs and redesigned some of the older glyphs. In older editions of WTA, they were like runic symbols the Garu used to communicate with each other. Philippe was kind enough to share his thought process behind his original designs. To summarize the process, Philippe created a unique system of glyphs for Garu communication, inspired by cuneiform writing but not based on any specific culture. The glyphs, which he unofficially named Chlorogram, that's claw with a K, were designed to reflect the Garu's world, with symbols like the moon and claws that aimed to make them less abstract and more meaningful, drawing from universal symbolism whilst avoiding direct real-world influences. The design process involved imagining how Garu would convey their stories through these symbols. Now, as interesting as all of this is, and it's great to have that bit of insight and like peering behind the veil as it were, I am not a fan of all of these W5 glyphs. In fact, I don't like most of them. Some are too human/graphic design in their look and have far too much finesse for a Krynos to control, especially when the Garu cannot control themselves too long in their Krynos form due to the reworkings of how that works, but we'll get onto that later in this review. From what Philippe said, the glyphs could have been done by Garu in their human form, Homid, throughout the ages, and that is where the ultimate problem lies with these designs for me. The original glyphs of Werewolf the Apocalypse were designed by the developers to be integral to the overall storytelling of WTA, rather than one artist's interpretation of what the glyphs could be. The book, which you can purchase on DriveThruRPG, The Silver Record, contains every WTA glyph, what they mean, and how they were created within that universe. It also serves as an in-canon collection of stories, not written down from one Garu to the next. What the W5 glyphs presents, in my opinion, is a fix to a system that did not need to be fixed. I hold no grudges against Philippe for any of this, as I know he was not aware of this design choice, and it is very clear he was passionate for the setting and loved the work he put in. His designs, as free as they were to make his own statement, exist, I feel, in isolation and ultimately mean nothing in the supposedly cultureless setting W5 attempts to provide for its readers, almost as if the only instruction was, a previous artist worked on this, make it better. Of course, we cannot have a review about the quality of the W5 corebook and its art without talking about the many traces and incredible sloppiness of Krzysztof Barnowski. Yes, many of the pieces he has done for this book are pretty good, particularly many of his wolf faces and full-page spreads he has done that punctuate the beginning of the Umbra and Spirits chapter on page 222 and Allies and Antagonists on page 238. But all of this is outdone by the infamous and plentiful examples of traced images. It began on the 23rd of April 2023, where World of Darkness shared some preview art for the Glasswalkers tribe, with the individual on the far right using the face of Tame Iti, a New Zealand Maui art activist who famously does not like people using his face. World of Darkness responded with a standard apology.jpg, whilst enforcing that this book would definitely be available in August that year, which is the appropriate time to advertise your problematic book, World of Darkness. This, however, will not be the last, as people began to investigate as you naturally would do and found more examples. The Hart Warden wrapper on page 72 is a stock image that has been flipped and traced from iStock. The American footballing playing silver fan on page 80 is literally Ed O'Neill as Al Bundy with some old guy's face, which again has been flipped and traced. The biggest offenders, however, can be found in the section regarding the Ghost Council starting on page 68, which every single portrait has been confirmed to be a traced image. From left to right we have Morgan Riley posing on her Tumblr, who has been frequently confused with Maria Franz of Helium, which is understandable, she is wearing the same headdress there. Next to her is a woman serving in the Israel Defense Forces, the IDF, known for partaking in genocide, a picture taken from the Times of Israel's website. Second from the right is a monk found on dreamstime.com, which is, you guessed it, a stock image. Finally, we have a traditional Mongolian wrestler found on Twitter, adorned in what I suppose is supposed to be a Eskimo with blood around their face and hands, which definitely doesn't make this person look less polite, people would call a savage. All of these have accompanying leaks in the description, both including their sources and or side-by-side comparisons to highlight and archive the utter disgrace that is Krzysztof Bajewski. Of course, World of Darkness said they would investigate and remove said images, assuring their Discord server that has happened, but obviously that is not the case. So they either shit at their job, they lied, or Krzysztof Bajewski is clearly buddied with someone working there, and loyalty to someone who is unable to come up with anything that's original without stealing from other artists and creators supersedes any sense of honour and dignity. The fact the World of Darkness kept hiring him after this for a short time just really shows the little value they have over their products. But with all of that aside, the artwork depicting the tribes are quite frankly a little shit. Most of them are just regularly looking people with day jobs or one-note character concepts for the most part, that basic or newbie players latch onto make something work. None of them help me, an experienced and professional games master, understand and convey what this tribe is about visually. Using Legacy Werewolf to compare for just a moment, each tribe had one piece of art done by Ron Spencer, with each example being Krynos Born, or Homid telling a story within that single piece of artwork and conveying the main tribe's themes. W5 does not do this, just people that can turn into near identical werewolves because they all look the same in Krynos, because the lack of culture W5 tries to present is ever present here. About 10ish minutes into the review, or more or less 15, we can now focus on the actual written material, starting with the standard introductory chapter found in many World of Darkness books, which details what it aims to cover and what you will find inside. It begins to cowardly describe the nature of the Garu and what their purpose is on Earth: to protect Gaia, fight against the worm, and supposedly about spirituality, despite subtly indicating the Umbra is painful for the Garu now, which is certainly a choice to make Werewolf more street-focused and not make them more powerful than their precious vampires. I call this writing cowardly because of the second sentence of the book that reads, quote, "and that violence, brackets, almost, always righteous, if only subjectively." End quote. Yes, there is plenty to scold the Garu for, their violence being a part of this, but peaceful negotiations are not appropriate methods of action when the apocalypse is knocking on your fucking front door, discouraging readers to properly take on the mantle of being a werewolf is in a very Weasley manner otherwise. Many real-world problems have been sorted with riots and aggressive action, the people pushing back against the man, and it is very entitled to anyone to say with their whole chest out, violence is never the answer. We also have that italicized paragraph in the bottom right corner of the same page that makes it very clear that W5 is a remake and not a continuation of the original material, highlighting that the lore, cutely presented in quotation marks, like lore is a concept that exists only as a myth, aren't necessarily true in this edition, and that the reader should take what is presented at face value. Not only is this a large fuck you to older Werewolf fans with hope of expanding the material they have been collecting and playing for the last 30-ish years, but also for newer fans eager to learn more. It discourages deeper exploration of the setting, which in turn limits critical thinking about W5, and there's less material for comparison. You'd think they'd want you to buy the older content since it generates revenue for the owners of World of Darkness. Paradox, though perhaps less so for different teams are involved now. This approach is also reflected in the direction of H5 and later V5. Now, is it because they want this to be the definitive edition, or is it because they're not fond of the older material, or possibly afraid it will garner more praise than the larger retcon? The chapter carries on with this hypocritical stance, particularly with, surprisingly enough, in the mature content warning at the end of the chapter, which honestly reads like a poor excuse for the authors and thus players to be offensive, but it is also not true. There will be many instances where they shy away from mature subjects to minimize controversy, presumably to cut costs on hiring cultural sensitivity readers in the future, which also assumes that they can listen to what is being said anyway. It is well known that all indigenous identities, bar the core themes that make up Werewolf the Apocalypse, have been removed and wiped out. These are, of course, the Ghost Council, the Gale Strikers, the older and younger brother, and the Lieutenant and Wendigo respectively. These are all same names for the same thing. Doing this, it removes what it is like to be a colonized group of people, and by removing any sense of culture, you actually create a lovely void for white supremacists, reinforcing the most hateful of cultures, eugenicism. The Black Furies lack their distinct femininity with their rewrite. Concepts of culture known for travelling and what it feels like to be an immigrant dashed from the Silent Striders. The Fianna was changed last minute to the Hart Wardens to remove the political meanings around that word. Despite Justin Achilles, Fianna is just a word slander. That's an actual quote, by the way. The first proper chapter of the book, A World of Darkness, is going to be your main lore dive on the World of Darkness as a whole from the Garu's perspective, including who and what the Garu are, the gothic punk vibes mostly found in Vampire, but I can understand them not putting goth savage from 2nd edition. That, and the vampire fans this book was marketed for, know the concept behind goth punk, despite neither term properly applying to W5 or V5 as presented. We get an idea of the animistic worldview W5 tries to present as well as the apocalypse we are currently in. Only from this book alone, without including my knowledge of legacy material, it is not stated how long the Garu, and by extension, the rest of the world within the World of Darkness, has been enduring the apocalypse. 5 weeks? 5 months? Years? Decades? One could infer real-world events, but we are not supposed to be doing that, for the book clearly states we should take the material at face value. No deep thinking allowed. But when nothing is presented, what do you do? No player or ST is going to do this, and I've already seen people pull from older material playing W5 incorrectly according to the core book itself. It is also this chapter that has the now infamous Not All Corporations sidebar on page 26 that, to summarise, highlights that the setting's environmental apocalypse is driven by human choices that harm Gaia even if they don't realise it. It claims that whilst companies and capital aren't inherently evil, it exploits the environment for profit fuels the crisis the werewolves fight against. The Garu's efforts to create real change, exploring the struggle to challenge greed embodied by the worm, and emphasizes human responsibility in shaping the future. The actual text, like much of the text of the book, appropriates revolutionary language to push a neoliberal worldview, again undermining the collective action of the people and the absolute core of Werewolf the Apocalypse. The sidebar doesn't inspire revolution, despite its repeated business lingo to sound relevant and hip with their anarch readers, but it supports capitalism and denounces responsibility from the corporations. The large-scale cooperation is only good if you have the power and the money to make these changes, which anyone prepared to look out the fucking window can see is not working. And I think everyone fucking knows this. Putting this back into a W5 perspective, the Garu Nation has failed, and if you strip it back to your patch of green in your town or city, that is all the Garu can change. Leave the big world problems to the adults. It's honestly fucking insulting. There are some things I do like about this chapter, admittedly, such as presenting all three of the Triad, Wild Weaver and Worm, as antagonists, with the SI, Second Inquisition, being unintentional agents of the Worm, though more could have been done to expand these areas. Karen's taken a more mystical vibe, much like they were in First Edition, which is again a very westernized caricature looking to animism and certain indigenous cultures. The presentation of Pentex is, for the most part, good, enforcing there is not a Pentex company but a much larger monopoly buying and using their companies to spread the worm, but definitely not the bad guys. The second chapter is called Being Garu, which is an attempt of a deep dive into the lore into the Garu's culture, by which I mean the pool is wide but shallow. The War of Rage and Impergium are vague in their descriptors, which, given the nature of W5, this makes sense. Yet, I feel this is something the Garu would pass down on, but again, oral storytelling is not reliable, so we can probably assume that these two defining features of Garu history are unreliable lies. Despite this and the Concord, there is no defining moment in Garu history, no battles or wars to sing of, the glory days of the nation, which makes the Garu nation feel a bit shit at what they do. Of course, there is still the downfall of the White Howlers and the return of some of the more racist things in the form of the colonization and extermination of the Native Americans and paying lip service to the sacrifice of the Croatan, invoking the same inaccurate westernized history behind it all. As a result, it, along with everything else in the book, is disconnected, in that it really does not tell a particular world viewpoint, and it feels hostile to read, almost if I am reading what W5 wants the Get, or should I say, cult or Fenris to be. The exception to this hostility is the letter// document on page 38, which I feel was the only thing that had any cultural advice, yet it feels so disconnected from anything WTA related that it almost feels like World of Darkness going, see, we can hire sensitivity readers, see, we did a good thing, praise us! With mentioning of the cult of Fenris, who are properly introduced as fanatical zealots to Gaia, a new antagonist tribe to the now useless and redundant Black Spiral Dancers, the other tribes are summarized, alongside the Moon cults, which are the Garu who turned their back on Gaia but worship Luna, which is such a genuinely cool idea, as it presents Garu that don't need to rely on a singular religious ideology, but what is presented here is so scarce and only added to the barest of details right at the end of the book, and that is infuriating to behold. Similarly, the Stolen Moons, which you may know as the Skin Dancers, another name change to presumably avoid connotations to the Navajo Skin Walker. The other non-player tribe, as of the writing of the script, are the Stargazers that are pretty much identical to their previous iterations, but we will explore that later. You will also get contradictory statements regarding auspices, as the book cannot decide whether Garu's auspice is determined at birth or when they experience their first change, literally a chapter apart from each other. Amidst all of the summaries of the Garu culture and physical and biological makeup, we have a small sidebar on page 48 titled Changing Ways, and it pissed me off the fucking second I saw it, and I feel any long-standing World of Darkness fan should be too. For those who lack the context or need a little bit of a reminder, Onyx Path Publishing were developing a book for Werewolf the Apocalypse 20th Anniversary Edition called Changing Ways. The lead ST developer for White Wolf at the time, which was owned by Paradox at this time might I add, Martin Erickson, hand-fisted a load of disgusting shit in this book. Black Furies killing trans women, Silverfangs knifing their genitals, racist and ableist rhetoric throughout. It is honestly a book of two halves, good and fucking disgusting. Several writers on the project didn't know anything about it, and when they did, they disowned themselves from that book. When V5 came and White Wolf are apologising for all this weird Nazi shit, and Jason Cole, on behalf of White Wolf, was apologising for this, was asked about the Changing Breeds controversy, to which he admitted knowing about it and apologised for that as well, which turns out to be fucking meaningless for what they would do in the V5 Player's Guide years later, and more relevant for tonight's review, this stupid fucking sidebar that could not have been coincidental. It's also known that Onyx Path Publishing writers tried to remove some of the offensive naming schemes of the native tribes, or the pure tribes I should say, by the time their last W20 book came out. Apocalyptic Record was being written, and Paradox categorically said no. The result of this is that it antagonizes legacy werewolf fans who praise this supposedly controversial content that they, Paradox, demanded be in there, without Onyx Path knowledges, whilst 5th edition writers and teams bask in the glory of making all these sweeping changes by exterminating the native tribes and stealing written work from a Native American author. It's fucking disgusting that they constantly adopt this process of attack and play scapegoats and protect their own. Chapter 2, yes, we're still on this fucking chapter, also is the chapter that introduces to Hogsglog and gamifines Harano. Harano here is treated as Garu depression, but trivializes the severity of it later on to connect it only to the losing of touchstones with no real consequence of not having one. Your touchstones are only wolves and humans, but not spirits, a point of real contention for the 10 people that gave a shit. Hogsglog, as written, is an extreme righteousness, and like Harano, is a mechanical end state for your character. Harano and Horseglog fills up to 5, and if you're too depressed or have too much Harano to carry on, when it reaches 5, which is kind of offensive to actual depression sufferers like myself, where Harano/depression is seen as a weakness. When Horglosk fills up, you become too extreme and become a fascist, which makes it a mental health issue. Reminds me whenever a white person, usually a man, shoots up a group of people of colour or a school, authorities and right-wing groups are quick to say that the shooter is mentally ill, that fascism is just becoming very ill, which is fucking bullshit and incredibly offensive. Neither point goes either. You just move on to the other depending certain actions of the game, which doesn't make much narrative sense if your touchstones share your same shitty ideologies and presents a very weird message which I hope was unintentional. You gain Horglosk by breaking Chronicle tenets, which is interesting at first, until you realise that these are things that you genuinely agree with your group of players that are not going to break them for safety reasons. It also has an example of showing mercy as a Chronicle tenet idea, which if you show mercy, you're now a Garu fascist. Fucking bonkers, fam! Now, if any of this doesn't make any sense to you, this is when we're going to introduce the Cult of Fenrir, and they've also come to Horglosk, and you will now see that this is World of Darkness viewing the Get of Fenris as the unplayable fascist tribe that one small faction, the Sword of Hemdel, the Kareem Morma, originally wanted to be a player option. The official reason the Get are unplayable is that the team couldn't think of the 4 adjectives to describe them, which is a fucking lie, and anyone who believed that is literally stupid. It is also funny that 3 out of the 4 words for the Fenrir are literally in the antagonist section of the book. People will mention how the 20th anniversary edition brought them back, forgetting that book was meant to be setting agnostic and have everything you need in one book. Said people also assume that speaking about the camp as if they are live means that it encourages players to rise and join them rather than rise up against them and punch the Nazis. End quote. That, and it unfortunately makes plenty of sense in this day and age for at least one of the bastards still left trying to revive the camp. You will have people loyal to the World of Darkness cult who read the cult's description as eco-terrorists and leave it at that, but what fucking guru is not an eco-terrorist? That, and if you search up the word Nazi in your PDF copy of the W5 core book, Control and F, you will find 3 instances of that word being mentioned. All are in the Consider It Play chapter of the book, all of which are talking about fascism and punching Nazis, both of which specifically refer to the Cult of Fenris. Furthermore, every supplement or video game after W5 that includes the Cult of Fenrir is a Nazi that tries to convert Garu into Nazi and has Nazi human followers seeking for pure Garu to feed their numbers. Anyone who claims otherwise at this point is literally just 100% brain rot, naively ignorant, or really loves to eat ass and scat. Also, the name of the tribe is just fucking stupid. Why would the Get of Fenrir, which previous editions would always refer to themselves as the Fenrir anyway, would adopt the name cult? Cult is an antagonistic term to put upon those with spiritual and religious ideas we do not understand. The Fenrir's actions are bloody obvious, the book spells them out. As I'm ranting away about the stupid design choices, despite the Garu Nation claiming they have no idea what the Stargazers are up to, but they are listed as allies in the Allies and Antagonistics chapter, yet the Stargazers and Garu don't talk, despite them being allies. Their patron was once Chimera, but they can't say it is now, but I can tell you can. The fucking Stargazers can. Fucking ask them, world people. World of Darkness, do some fucking decent writing, you useless hacks. But I digress. This rant within a rant brings me onto the 3rd chapter, the Tribes and Auspices chapter. Auspices in this game serve no mechanical benefit besides dictating your starting auspices gift, though the Arun auspice does give us the beautiful sentences of claws in, blood sprays out, and fuck you worm. Fucking beautiful writing! Really provides a deep, meaningful commentary about this auspice, just writing of the fucking year. Fucking gorgeous. The tribes themselves are presented in pretty much the same fashion. The who and what they are presented, making sure to include 4 adjectives of power, as a video game company owns World of Darkness, and players are incapable of understanding anything without fun buzzwords. The associated patron spirit is revealed, most of which have had revisions on their legacy counterparts. Black Fury place has Gorgon rather than Pegasus, cause they probably wanted something easy to remind the newbies the Black Furies in older editions are Greek, even though any and everyone is capable of being whatever tribe, which makes the existence of the Silver Fangs and Shadow Lords all the more nonsensical. The Glasswalkers have Spider as their patron now, not Cockroach, rather than having the symbolism that they adapt and survive in whatever urban environment they are in. The devs missed that and gave them Spider because spiders weave webs like the Weaver. Woo-hoo-hoo-hoo! Each tribe has its own clan weakness and merit. Sorry. Favor and ban, adding modifiers to certain roles and making it slightly harder to regain power the next session. To conclude, each tribe has 4 archetypes, or in less video game terms, concepts for players to test out if they are like me and have no idea what to make of half of these tribes because they are poorly written, uninspiring, and ultimately uninteresting. Even with the most archetypes having at least one music-focused one, because the only cool hip storytellers these days are musicians. But what exactly is provided? Well, the Black Furies are written to be bad at their quest for social justice and invoking philosophies. The writers clearly don't understand that ultimately feel like budget bourgeois. Despite this, their patron and gifts make constant Greek references, with the former making it more obvious than before. I've spoken a fair amount of the Bone Gnawers already, but what is left of the Bone Gnawers are a tribe that tries to find secrets which pigeonholed into the sneaky, stealthy tribe. The Children of Gaia carry on with their old pacifism, feels a little slapped on in W5, but now forces them into paranormal investigators, which is honestly what the Ghost Councils is, but doing with more focus and much clearer. That said, the focus they had in the previous editions was to try and play and put the Garu Nation together long enough to work together, but they can't do that with 5th edition because there is no fucking Garu Nation to work with. It's gone here until Shatter Nation retcons that cause fucking reasons. The Gale-stalkers, formerly younger brother, are hunters that hunt things because reasons? You know, other than wolves being predators. If anything, they are knockoff hunters in darkness from Werewolf the Forsaken. Their ban being killing and cannibal focus doesn't make sense for the concept either, but this links into back to the Wendigo myths and a part of the Garu's tribe culture. The Ghost Council only makes sense to me because I know what they were the Yuktena in older editions, but I have no idea why anyone would want to play this horrible mutation of James Sambrano's uncredited writing, especially when their gifts really don't align with their concept, and that horned serpent is still culturally appropriative knowing what inspired that. The archetypes are also fucking boring. The Glasswalkers that previously had Tammy Eaty is replaced by a B. Dave Walters lookalike are also fucking boring because W5's design. Every edition of Werewolf prior to 5th made the Glasswalkers interesting by not putting the entire focus on the Garu on humanity, for which the Glasswalkers blend in with seamlessly, adapting to the urban sprawls of the Weaver. The complete shift for what it means to be a wolf to whatever the fuck we have here, no, does not make the Glasswalkers stand out, except they are werewolves that can't break stuff now. Fucking stupid. The Hart Wardens are also the hunters in darkness in that they protect their sacred places, that is, but so does every other decent fucking Garu. Despite their detachment from the Fianna, there is constant references to Celtic and Irish culture in their write-up, and their gifts that the Fianna have from older editions. The Red Talons piss me off because of how little sense they make in W5. They still maintain their anti-human stance, but mostly lupus rather than all lupus. They openly eat people, spread disease despite nothing in the corebook that supports this mechanically and thematically. It does not make sense why human-born Garu would want this, and it would not impact the setting by saying that the Red Talons are the only lupus-centric tribe. Unlike the presentation of the W5 Black Furies, they are the actual accelerationists. Unlike the Cult of Fenris, the Red Talons are written here are almost worse than the Fenrir, and definitely worse than the previous iterations of the Red Talons. They feel very stereotypical to the average vampire fan who is asked to explain a Red Talon. The Shadow Lords are surprisingly good, only because it is exactly what they have always been, but much easier to understand. The Silent Striders still wander around, but there is no curse, so there is no literal reason for them to do this, and the removal of travelling cultures they are associated with, they just wander because reasons. They could have tied it in with the Ministry, if only by reference. They could have decided that Al is pissed and is punishing them, but they don't. It's pure laziness. Finally, the Silver Fangs don't make any fucking sense. Divine right isn't a reason, especially in a nation that no longer fucking exists. Moving on. Next we reach the character creation chapter. I'm not going to go over the main meat and potatoes here as we are over 30 minutes, nearly 40 minutes of this review, and I've done a character creation guide for this game already, so I will highlight a few things. Like with V5, most of the backgrounds are vague to the point of being unhelpful and lack any interesting inspiration. Clement Lupus is only interesting to the point that every edition of Werewolf before 5th has made a point saying that Garu don't pretend to look like dogs, yet this game encourages it in two places. The writer for the lupus, and with this merit. I would have only found this remotely acceptable in my games if there was a flaw, if there was a darker mirror that you look like lichen shit, feeding into the disease and bearer idea from the Red Talons from before. Many of the backgrounds that came over when vampire like Beauty and Mask don't make much sense either, but we need to get those vampire fans comfy with playing wolves for their cringe fanfics. Like vampire, there are lore sheets too, 5 in total, and none of them are interesting. You need one to safely travel through the Umbra, and one allows you to cleanse a black spiral dancer, bringing it back from the brink. Fascist? Nuh-uh. Rejecting of the fucking worm? Yeah! Just have a nice fucking chat and everything will be okay. And following the fascist as a mental illness chat, we're saying it's incurable here? As much as Twitter liberals and leftists would hate to admit this, it is possible to redeem someone on the far right. On the topic of Twitter, the most infuriating thing to me in this chapter is the description of 5 dots of composure. You probably wouldn't have paid $44 billion for Twitter. Not only is it a masterclass of cringy writing that has aged like sour milk, but it is more how people discovered this line was in here, and that was through Jason Carr and Outstar sharing this one snippet on release day, and I have a massive problem with this. These are the marketing manager and the community developer respectively. They have just witnessed the community outraged by numerous examples of plagiarized, traced, and stolen art. Accusations from a former employee accusing Kareem Mormer is essentially a Nazi, and D10s that are uglier than baby food. It is your jobs to inspire hope and reassurance that this game is actually fine, with great writing that sells the strengths of this new edition of the second most popular TTRPG in your game line after Vampire the Masquerade, and that it looks awesome. Do they share some awesome descriptions of the Garu, themes or spirits, or some unique artwork? Do they fuck? They are the first fucking thing they release after Renegade's previews is this shit. And the Twitter crowd, they fucking loved it and ate all that shit up. So, mission accomplished, I suppose. Also, it's very anti-corporation of World of Darkness to be poking fun at Elon Musk. After all, hashtag not all corporations, folks. The following chapter is the goodies chapter to the players, rights, gifts and gear. I'm going to mostly brush over this chapter because I do not care for any of it. I do not understand why there are native gifts here other than to replace the breed gifts from the older editions. Most of the damage inducing ones are only useful when your renown is much higher than the character creation, which you can only gain through experience points rather than actually accomplishing things in your game. A poor decision to let players decide on their progression, in my opinion. Many of the gifts do not work as well or at all on other supernaturals, which at the time of writing is only other vampires, with the suggested reason is that someone, Kareem, didn't like having his vampire LARP characters having Garu using gifts from the Umbra to take out his character, which is another reason why the Umbra in W5 is a chaotic mess. I am also not a fan on how rights have been changed to force people to offer their rage dice, which makes failing a right all the more frustrating. It discourages teamwork within the pack, but I guess if a corporation could do it, they could actually be useful. It is also clear that whoever sent the brief off to the right of Karen building to the artist clearly did not know what a Karen is, and neither did the artist. Within the same chapter, you have talismans which connected to the background of the same name, and the only one I wish to talk in any amount of detail is the partridge ring, which protects mortals from the effects of the delirium. I have seen W5 players use this constantly to protect touchstones and in-game families, essentially recreating kinfolk but with extra steps. Fucking ironic. Additionally, Elbrecht's silver crown is mentioned on a side sidebar on page 190 as an interesting story hook that could have worked as a neat lore sheet connecting PCs to the Silver Fangs and all the Crown, but alas, we got Project Twilight instead. I will omit the weapons section of the chapter, which is essentially how it all ends, so I will conclude this portion of the review talking about the care and building part, which is treated like V5's Haven and Coterie merits, but with none of the importance, given the amount of times I've seen W5 STs ask how to get their players care for the care and more. Placing it just before the ST chapter in a portion of the book only the ST would look at anyway is a good place to start. I also don't agree with the actual information of them with these sorts of mechanics, for it shifts the focus from being a spiritual safe space to an army base against the worm, which I can understand given the direction of the little metaplot W5 gives us, but I just think there is a missed opportunity to really embellish the reader with more spiritual focus. The next chapter is the storytelling chapter, and I think this is one of the most antagonistic ST chapters I have ever seen. It demands the ST to do certain things rather than make suggestions on its themes, so you don't play its game wrong. Page 202 has my least favourite passage in the book. It doesn't come across as heroic or encourages the ST to make the players feel they can change their personal world, as W5 really strips things back, but just hold it out to the end. It's a little nihilistic, and honestly, I'm not sure why any of the Garu wants to wait things out. I do, however, like it's breaking down on the Western form of storytelling 3-act structure to build stories and chronicles from, even if it is a little dry, and what you should and shouldn't do when creating memorable antagonists. Yes, you heard that right, the form of storytelling suggested is not culturally agnostic. Holy smokes! Chapter 8 is about the Umbra and spirits, and it can basically be narrowed down to it's wild, hostile, and changes constantly, making traversal across it dangerous for the Garu, but there is no real point of reference to what it actually looks like, which is both a blessing and a curse for the ST. I like the idea it can change with emotions and events in the area, and spirits can and often respond to this emotionally, but I ultimately do not know what spirits are like in the Umbra, which is the most frustrating thing trying to work with the patrons wanting beyond a tribe's loyalty. Following this is the allies and antagonists, the last proper chapter of the book before ending on the lore sheets. A short one-shot which is pretty overall, and the constituent plays which isn't lifted from Jacqueline Brick's writing in V5 and relies on the old punch a Nazi whilst encouraging players to become Nazis. Nazis are a threat to us all now. It's fucking childish to present Nazis as mythical monsters. They exist, and they are ever present, and we have gone beyond not calling out people Nazis to save face. Making a joke out of it and dumbing it down its severity is a common white supremacist tactic, by the way. Have a look on Twitter at your favourite racist cunt. But back to chapter 9 itself, the presentation on the Banes and Fomori, the former manifesting into something being a cool visual choice. I am not a fan of Pentex taking central stage in the chapter and some companies it owns in assigned bars, the names of which are really similar to legacy companies they didn't want to use for some reason, especially when in all earlier portions of the book they tries to highlight Pentex works in the shadows. It should have been a bunch of these companies, then a little sidebar that says something like, rumour has it that Pentex ... because it is more authentic. By all means, give the reader information about Pentex to use, but switch the focus. I also don't agree with them having a patron spirit, particularly something as boring and predictable as Fly. Similarly, the Black Spiral Dancer's new patron of Bat lacks the same creepy thighs of Whippoorwill that stems from indigenous cultures, but Spiral Dancers look creepy Bat, so they clearly worship Bat and occasionally Fly. Fuck my life. The inclusion of the Anansi and Corex in the form of Spider and Raven shifters is an interesting choice, given the hostility some of the World of Darkness team have to the changing breeds, and we of course get vampires, which is honestly some of the best writing in this book, and I fucking hate that. Why? Because it just reinforces the perspective that the developers who went into this with the love of vampire, and the one calling the shots did this not caring for werewolf and did everything he could to diminish it. W5 is a reimagining rather than a continuation of the previous setting. While some names remain the same, the history and context have changed significantly. The history of the Garu is now vague and unclear, and even with the spirits unable to provide clarity. There is no kinfolk, no crying or spawn, Gnosis no longer exists, all powers are activated using rage or willpower. Krynos form now requires killing, spending willpower or frenzy, which reduces its utility. Using rage makes it easier to lose the wolf, and until the Garu can howl at the moon, they are unable to shapeshift or use gifts. The tribe still exists but function more like totem mystery cults than distinct cultures. Environmental concerns and damage are equated with the apocalypse, and Gaia is now dead. The spirit world is more alien and hostile, with spirits harboring animosity towards the Garu. Entering the Umbra is only possible through rituals, and Garu suffer damage if they remain in there too long. The Garu nation has fallen, and the litany is considered irrelevant. A tribe has succumbed to hoglosk and overwhelming zealotry and desire to commit atrocities just to effect change. This tribe is inspired by the worst stereotypes and camps of the old Get of Fenris, which are not playable in this iteration. In the current adventures, the cult of Fenris is portrayed with strong ties to fascist themes, including human neo-Nazi supporters. They are the primary antagonists, with the Black Spiral Dancers taking a backseat, having lost their purpose after achieving a hollow victory, I think. It is almost as hollow as every victory achieved by the players, whose rules and systems are literally stacked against them, making for frustrating gameplay and a corrupted version of what Werewolf should be. A game about culture and family, stories and honor. Essentially, W5's Apocalypse is toothless, and the game provides more guidance on what not to do than on the actions to take or what the apocalypse even fucking looks like. The game seems hesitant to define its stance, opting instead of a passive-aggressive remarks here and there. Despite W5's claims that it's about fighting back against pollution, it shies away from allowing its players to be eco-terrorists, though some do slip through, and outright labels direct action as the wrong approach. It's not just about what W5 are players doing against, it's also about how little the players are actually required to do. This game, whether intentionally or not, seems to suggest that there's no need to do anything, even if the world is ending. It won't inconvenience you. W5's version of the apocalypse is structured so that there's no disruption to the status quo. It's an apocalypse that maintains and protects existing structures. But an apocalypse that changes nothing isn't really an apocalypse at all. In reality, W5 seems to cling to the apocalypse label more out of tradition than a genuine intent to address it. The game prefers to focus on werewolf packs and care and tending, rather than tackling something as serious as the fate of the fucking world. Ultimately, it steals the best ideas from Werewolf the Forsaken and makes them worse. I do understand and appreciate those who are able to have fun with W5. Seriously, I do. All the power to them. It is part of the reason why I developed my homebrew, We Rage as One, for said people to have unable to find a group to play with. But it is important to critique and understand that nothing exists within a void. This game had horrible management. This game promotes fascism in subtle ways, not as something to rise up against, but to embrace as part of your character's inevitable downfall. Hoglosk is simulating fascism at the table, and if that is something you want to explore in your games, go at it, but to have it embedded within the rules of the games speaks volumes of the white supremacists designing this filth. And I know there are people who have been offended by my accusations and challenging the ideas of their favourite World of Darkness people, but the truth is, they don't care about you. Just your money. It is also clear that Werewolf is not important to them, and I believe I've made it clear as to how and why this is the case. Werewolf the Apocalypse 5th Edition is a game built on lies and fascism. A main artist lied about using original artwork, lied about plagiarizing existing pieces of art and stock photos, lied about not stealing people's artwork, making a setting culture agnostic, something that is literally impossible to do without inserting your own cultures in there. It lied about being a true reimagining, terrified of making any meaningful discussions, paying lip service to what has come before. It treats community and minorities as funny fandoms of their own dramas and shipping, unable to save your world, just holding off the inevitable. W5 is not a good werewolf game. It is not even a good piece of fiction. Practically everything about it is something to shame and neglect, just as its team and writers do. If you want to play a werewolf in a 5th edition setting, don't. Play 20th Anniversary or Revised Edition. If you want more information on the development and better in-depth insights on W5's development, I am going to leave a few links for you. I will leave a link with James Sambrano Sambrano, one of which being his Patron calling out Kareem Morma for what he is, and a GM talk on a bunch of gamers' YouTube. I'm also going to leave a video that Matthew Dawkins did in his review of W5, where he talks a bit about the development of it, which confirms a bit of what I've just been sharing with you. Those will be much better uses of your time than trying to homebrew and fix W5. Then again, so would be being kicked in the head by a horse. And for those of you who are new to the Law by Night brand and the reviews I occasionally do, I do not do out of 10 scores because they are subjectively pointless. One person's 10 out of 10 is another's 3 out of 5 stars, which is another's minus 42 out of 100, so I shall rate this book Crawl for More out of 10, as that is just as helpful as a proper out of 10 score. To be kept updated, follow the Law by Night VTM Instagram and Blue Sky pages to find out when we upload on each episode. You can also find out by subscribing to the YouTube channel and clicking on the little bell, as you'll be immediately notified when the latest episode is live. Until next time, farewell.